Hello and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who'd like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you.
Hi, I'm Helen Leathers, and today I am joined by my co-host and business partner, Tom Dillon. Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. Little tired this morning, out dancing last night, so
Yeah.
burning the candle at both ends. But I'm ready. I'm ready and willing and able to engage in podcasting this morning.
Good. I'm glad. What are we talking about today?
This morning we are talking about systemic coaching. Oh, told you.
It does sound interesting. Let's start with the basics then. What do we mean when we talk about systemic coaching?
It's a great question. Thank you. In a nutshell, systemic coaching is an approach that focuses on understanding and working with the largest systems that influence people's lives. So if we've got a coachee in the room, rather than just focusing on them as an individual and their kind of internal architecture, their thoughts and their feelings, it's actually recognizing that there is a system at play and they are part of that system, and the system will be influencing them. They obviously will be influencing the system, but the system will be having an impact on whatever is going on for them. So just that recognition that we're all interconnected and no man is an island.
And what sort of systems are we talking about?
So it could be as simple as a family. And obviously there's a form of therapy called internal family systems, which would look at that dynamic and look at all of the dynamics that are going on within a family, and patterns that reoccur within a family. But within organizations, there is a system at play. So if we think about all our doctors, those working within the NHS are working within a system. And a system that has a huge impact on how they show up and how effective they can be.
And I suppose those wider cultural, societal influences as well that come into play a lot with all sorts of things, from confidence to imposter syndrome to how we show up in the world.
Yeah, definitely. So yes, it's not just a structure as you would recognise it. So the NHS is something that people go, oh, well, there is a system, and we can see that how that is impacting us. But then there are obviously invisible systems, and as you say, cultural aspects of our life become part of our life without us recognising it. And if we look at there's a model of psychology around social psychology called social constructivism. So the idea that we are socially constructed, so we don't end up as adults without there being some influence of society and families and cultural aspects of where we live. If you take someone from one particular family and culture and move them somewhere else, and they grew up somewhere else, then they would have different way of looking at the world because of those social structures. So systems are always at play.
I recall that phrase being in one of my psychology textbooks when I was studying it, with lots of strange diagrams. But yes, I do remember that. So what we're saying is systemic coaching looks at the whole picture and the web of connections and all that interconnectedness rather than just the individual. Yeah. And we would never really just focus in on the individual. There'd always be some element of outside influences, I think, in a conversation in the coaching room.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, because I don't think anyone ever comes and it's just about them. People generally come into the coaching room talking about other people and why they don't have work-life balance, that sort of thing. And that's obviously all this. The system is at play in all of that. So we're never going to just focus on the individual. Although I do quite a lot of work within organizations, coaching individuals, and I always see the individual in front of me as my client, even though someone else is paying the bill. Yeah. I'm focused on them as an individual and very much have a relationship with them. So I guess I'm seeing the system through their eyes, and I guess that can be problematic. Not suggesting that I collude with my coachees, but you are only ever seeing their side of the story. I do quite a bit of mediation, and quite often when you've done that, you'll see one person's side of the story, and then you'll talk to the other party that's involved in mediation, and you'll see a completely different story. So there will always be that outside element that we're not seeing.
Yeah.
So I guess, I've got one university that I do quite a lot of work with, and I suppose I've been working within that organization for 14 years. So I have some understanding of the culture and the politics and the dynamics that go on, which is in some ways is helpful. In some ways it can interfere a little bit with your assessment of the situation. So you might be starting to think about other elements of the system coming into play when someone's talking about their own situation. But it definitely has a part to play.
Okay.
And I guess it's interesting to think about the work that we're doing with that individual. And if we imagine that they want to change something and we coach them and bring about the change they want to see, and they go back out there into the system, it could be that whatever change they make then starts to have a ripple effect within that system.
Yes, of course.
So we don't necessarily see that, and we must say, oh, well, we've done good work there. They've made the change they want to see, and we don't necessarily see what impact that's having elsewhere. And it could be having a detrimental impact elsewhere.
Yeah, and on an individual basis, if you like, not within a system, if you're working with someone on their thoughts and beliefs, boundaries maybe, and they start to make changes, that can often have that ripple effect into the people around them and their family dynamics, because they change the dance, they change how people are used to interacting with them. So that will have an impact, and sometimes that can cause ructions. It should be positive for the person who's making the change, but it can be challenging because they're becoming a different version of themselves, which people kind of aren't used to.
Yeah, and if we think about transactional analysis, we talk about changing the script. And because the script isn't working for the individual in front of us, and if they go back into whatever relationship they're in and change the script, the other person has no idea what's going on. That script has changed. I had a lovely experience once. I was teaching coaching skills to someone, part of a group, but he came back to me and said, Tommy, you've nearly cost me my marriage.
Oh.
Yeah. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, well, I kind of got home the other night and my wife sat me down and said, you need to sit down and talk to me. It's okay. Didn't know what was going on. And she said, I said, what happened? She said, well, you're having an affair, aren't you? I said, what? No. What makes you think that? She said, you've never listened to me in the way that you've been listening to me the last few weeks. You're clearly having an affair and trying to overcompensate.
Oh, because he was learning coaching skills.
He was actually listening to her.
I mean, that says so much. There's so much to think about there.
It was all fine in the end.
Good.
He blamed me.
But it worked out well, I hope.
Well, yeah. Yeah, and it's a great skill to learn. But obviously, even that, and we're not. He was just part of a coaching course, so he wasn't coming with the idea that he was going to change his world, but it changed anyway.
And we do know that from our graduates, don't we? That they change as they go through our course.
Yeah, so I think on that very simple level, it could be the system could just be a relationship. But then obviously within families as well, that's going to have an impact, and within bigger organizations. So within an organizational context, I think systemic coaching is seen as something that needs to be paid attention to. So if you were doing team coaching, so you have had a team that you're working with, you might also be working with individuals within that team, and they might then be having an impact on the wider organization. And if you think about maybe a GP practice where someone within, let's say that someone within the administration team is suddenly playing up and not being disruptive, that might impact the work that the administration team do. And then that has a wider impact on the doctors, the nurses, everyone else within the system. And then that has an impact on the patients.
Yeah.
And on the wider NHS. So those ripple effects can go far and wide. So I think it's just recognition that we are not coaching the coachee in isolation.
Okay, so would you say that the systemic approach helps coaches to shift from just addressing the individual's immediate issue to considering the larger forces that are affecting them?
Yeah, absolutely. It just widens the lens, doesn't it? If we can look at it from the wider system perspective and take everything into account, And it kind of reminds me of Gestalt and the idea that we have fields theory, that the individual has that interplay with her environment, and that they're impacting the environment, the environment's impacting them. So it's a constantly changing process. But if you think about someone coming to coaching that maybe wants to look at their work-life balance, we can just think about their own behaviors and their own actions, how they're thinking and feeling about it, or we might start to look at what the system is like that they're working within, what their system is like at home. If I was talking to someone the other day, and they were talking about working late, and maybe working late so that they weren't having the chance to have quality time with their family, and that kind of wanting to finish early, but then it was dragging on and finishing, so they weren't having time to cook the dinner and all of that stuff. And when we dug down into it, that as a system, that didn't fill them with joy doing the cooking. So that it was almost like, well, staying at work for longer had a payoff for them, because what they thought was quality time wasn't really floating their boat as...
Yeah, the quality time was actually them cooking. But they thought quality time could be something else.
So they were seeing it as, I want to be home, I want to have that time to cook and be with the family, and they'll be talking to me whilst I'm cooking, and they were seeing it as quality time, but when they actually stopped to explore it, that wasn't quality time at all.
Yeah.
So that family system was having an impact on their work, but they were seeing it from the perspective, well, I'm just working too long. And I don't understand why I have every intention of leaving at 6 o'clock and I'm still there at 7.
Yeah.
So I think it's just that being able to explore it a little bit deeper than what we might, because we might come at that as just, it's just your time management, setting boundaries.
Yeah.
That could be a very simple, let's set some boundaries and stick to your boundaries. But when they come back and go, I didn't stick to my boundaries, I think it's interesting to go deeper and go, what's really going on there? And what are the systems at play in your life?
Yeah, that's interesting. Makes a lot of sense.
But obviously it could be that the culture of the organisation demands that presenteeism, so that they might be staying late because that's what's expected of them. So again, exploring what the culture's like. That idea of leaving your jacket on the back of your chair. I heard of that as a concept.
Yes.
Some organisations where they've gone home, but they've left the jacket on the back, just make it look as if they're there somewhere in the building, just because that's what's expected.
So we're recognising that the wider context influences behaviour. And it sounds like we might do this a little bit without understanding there's an approach called systemic coaching, and look at what other influences there are and consequences and so on. But how do we go about using a systemic approach specifically to help a coachee identify those patterns?
I think asking good questions and digging deeper. So say with that example that I gave, it would be very easy to say, well, it sounds like you need to set some boundaries and stick to your boundaries. Or actually, in digging a little bit deeper, there's more going on there that's having an impact. But I think it's useful if you are working in an organizational context to perhaps ask questions about how the solutions that someone is coming up with to their problem as they're working within the system might be useful to other people within the system. So you could potentially spread the learnings from the coaching out wider just by asking the coachee, how could this be useful to the rest of the organization?
Yeah, and I suppose the other way round would be what within the system can help you.
Yeah.
As well as what within the system can hinder you.
Yeah. And I think on a simpler basis, it's just exploring the situation fully of who else is involved in this, what impact are they having, who is influencing you in this situation.
It sounds like a great opportunity to get a flip chart out or a whiteboard and do some drawing.
No, I think that's another method, is to actually have some constellation work going on. So
constellation work.
Yes.
Explain this for our listeners.
So I haven't done it for a while, actually, and probably because I do more stuff online now. But I used to carry around with me a bag of play people.
Okay, of
And
course.
and so if people were talking about maybe an organizational issue, and maybe it was someone that's struggling with different relationships within that organization, just getting some play people out and getting them to put themselves, choose a figure that represents themselves, and then to find other play people that represent their boss and their colleagues and other people around them in the organization.
So little figurines,
Yeah.
like Lego figurines or something, and you'd map them out on a table?
Yeah. So, and it was, I always had a clown in my bag. The boss quite often got to be the clown. And yeah, so just having that, sometimes that can tell you what figure they choose, but also where they position them. And sometimes you'll find that people will position them quite close, but with their back to them.
Oh, interesting.
And that sort of dynamic can come out and is really interesting to explore. But other than that, it could be as simple as drawing, I think in family systems, they call it about a genogram. So that's
Yes.
different generations. So looking at that, so it's like a family tree, but then mapping out the relationships and the patterns of behaviors that you see within that dynamic. And obviously in organizations, you could have an organogram, an organizational chart, and do exactly the same thing. So you could, there might be one available, but you could bring out or map out all the people that are playing the organization, and then put in, okay, what's my relationship with those people, and what do I want that relationship to look like?
Interesting. I love the idea of mapping that out and getting something really visual, and having, I don't know, maybe just because I can be quite a visual person, I like to see what's going on, and I think I get more ideas that way. So it sounds like by allowing the coachee this space to explore the situation more deeply, because you said we can sometimes make an assumption, perhaps stay on the surface, we're going to go more deeply. You're really giving them the opportunity to uncover some insights and do some new thinking that perhaps they wouldn't have done otherwise.
And insights about their environment, the systems that are at play, they perhaps wouldn't stop to think about. Or so that person I was talking about that didn't really want to go home and cook dinner, that's a system at play, isn't it? There's a family system there. Why isn't someone else doing some cooking, or to encourage her to go home? But there's a conversation to be had there, isn't there?
Yeah.
But she wasn't recognizing that as a reason for staying at work until we went a bit deeper. So I think, really, really useful.
I love this. So if our listeners can take away one thing from today's episode, what would you say it was, Tom?
I think the takeaway is that coaching is never just about the individual. There is always going to be a system at play. Even if they're not working in an organization, there will be a family, there will be a social structure that they're part of, friends, social groups. So there's always going to be a system at play, which is going to be having an impact on how they view the world. So I think just recognizing that is key, really. And just being willing to explore it, and not just take the surface level of what the coachee is saying, but actually looking at what's behind it.
Excellent. And it's also perhaps about recognizing that change is more likely to stick when we take into account all of those systems that can influence someone's behavior and who you influence in turn.
Yeah, so it could be as simple as a behavior change that someone wants to make. So maybe their diet or their exercise regime. If the family that they, or their, where they live or where they work is not conducive to them making that change, then it can be really problematic. And again, if we were just working around behavior change, we would want to do that kind of ecology check of, well, okay, how does this fit into your life? It's no good saying, well, I'm going to go for a run at 4 o'clock every morning if you've got babies at home that there's no one else there.
Yeah.
It's got to fit, hasn't it? So
yeah. Thank you so much for exploring this topic today and for sharing your thoughts and experience of working with systems and systemic coaching. Because I've really enjoyed thinking about that.
And obviously there's a lot more to it. This is kind of surface. We have just skimmed the surface of it, so we could go a lot deeper with it. But I think it's just useful to bring to our podcast and let our coaches know that there's always going to be that system at play in any coaching conversation. So thank you, Helen.
Thank you. Next time on the podcast, we will be looking at the trans-theoretical model of change.
Yes, which I think a lot of our doctors will be aware of. It is something that's used in the medical world around behaviour change. It's closely tied to motivational interviewing and work with people with addiction issues. So that's something to think about. And it does have some relevance in the coaching room.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to it. And if you would like to share our podcast with people that you know who would be interested, we would love you to do that, and perhaps subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
Thank you, Helen.
Bye for now.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.